Being a band from Perth has traditionally had its challenges. As it's one of the most isolated capital cities in the world, it means that you are so far away from anything else that resembles a big music industry that you are sometimes left on your own a bit. Moving over to the bigger cities almost seems inevitable, and this is what happened for many years with the likes of INXS, the Triffids, and the Stems, all growing up in Western Australia as bands and then deciding to move to the eastern states to gain success. But that all changed in the mid to late 90s with a band called Jebediah. Hey everyone, this is Liam from Solitude here, and thanks for tuning into this video today. I'm going to be talking to you about one of my favorite West Australian bands of all time, Jebediah. Jebediah are an alternative rock band who were formed in Perth, Western Australia in 1994. The initial lineup were childhood friends Kevin Mitchell on guitar and vocals, Vanessa Thornton on bass, Chris Damon on guitar, and Almond Fullerija on drums. They all attended Leeming High School together in the southern suburbs of Perth. Kevin's brother Brett eventually took over on the Skins in 1995 as the original drummer wouldn't turn up to rehearsals. They got their name from the Simpsons character Jebediah Springfield and began playing music inspired by the 90s alternative grunge boom. The likes of Nirvana, Archers of Loaf, and Pavement were big influences on them. And some of their first gigs were high school events and the very popular National Campus Band Competition. They competed in this in 1995 and they took the title that year out. It was also at this event where they met a booking guy from Perth by the name of Heath Brady, who went on to become their manager. And this guy was helpful for them in the early days because he linked them up with some great gigs, and they ended up getting support for bands like UMI, Custard, and similar contemporaries in that sort of indie alternative rock that was booming in the 90s in Perth. But the scene they were really killing it in was the all-ages shows that were going on in Perth. See, in the mid-90s, there was a huge all-ages boom happening, and Jebediah were really the center of it, being the pivotal band that all the kids under the age of 18 loved in this city. They even said that their all-ages shows were getting more people to them than their overage events. So when they released their first EP named Twitch in 1996, it actually hit the #1 spot on the local West Australian charts of that week, which is a chart that no longer exists. It's all about nationwide charts now, but back in the day, that was a huge achievement to place at #1 for the West Australian charts. It even meant that they were getting played on commercial radio stations who would do countdowns of the charting songs. And with their growing success, a guy by the name of Pete Carroll, who was influential in the West Australian music scene, put together a showcase of West Australian Perth bands for a couple of guys from Sony to come check out. Those two guys were John O'Donnell and John Watson. Now, these two guys were actually extremely influential figures in the 90s in the Australian music scene. You see, John Watson went on to be the manager for Silverchair, and John O'Donnell, well, he started a label called Murmur. Murmur was a subsidiary label that was independent but still got a lot of help from Sony, so it was a perfect match for a band like Jebediah. And when they came over, they signed another West Australian band by the name of Ammonia, and this band Ammonia, as well as Pete Carroll, got these two guys onto Jebediah, saying, you need to check out this band. In 1996, Jebediah officially signed to Murmur, along with Ammonia and a couple other bands by the name of Silverchair and Something for Kate. And this gave them the connections that they needed to grow a larger audience, especially over in the eastern states. Previously, if a band was having a lot of success locally in Perth, the first thing that a label would ask them to do would be, you're going to have to come and move over to Sydney or Melbourne where we work. But at this time, something really interesting was happening in the music scene of Australia. You see, the radio station Triple J had become a national broadcaster by this stage, and it had had a few years to find its feet. Now it had a huge audience all over Australia, and if you wanted to find success in the whole country, well, there was a way for all people to hear your music, even if you didn't live in the bigger cities. So for that reason, and because Murmur was an independent label which believed in authenticity and helping out the little guy, Jebediah were able to stay home and do their work from Perth. They started to get a lot of airtime on Triple J, especially with their single Jerks of Attention, and from there, they were building a stronger and stronger following getting more support slots for those big up-and-coming alternative artists in Australia, like your Silverchairs, Powderfinger, UMIs. It was also around this time that all the members of the band decided to just go on the dole. And the reason why they did this was because of the backing of Murmur and the fact that they wanted to be full-time musicians and work on their debut record. So in 1997, the band officially released their debut album, Slightly Odway. Now, this album is one of my personal favorites, and it's for a lot of reasons, but I guess the main one I'd say is that it just sounds so Perth to me. There's something really authentic about it. The way that Kev sings those words, it just sounds really Perth. Like that accent, I can't really even define it or put my finger on it. The album was produced by Neil King, who had previously worked with Elvis Costello and the Smiths. It peaked at number 7 on the ARIA charts, and it went 2 times platinum. 5 of the singles from this album hit the Triple J Hottest 100s in 1997 and 1998, including Leaving Home at 10 of 97 and Harpoon at 7 of 98. These 2 songs are usually considered to be their most iconic pieces of work. Leaving Home in particular, I would personally have to say, is one of my favorite Australian songs. Leaving home, love was never good to me. Leaving home. There's just something about that song that really touches me. The content, the lyrics, the way it's being sung, the energy it gives off. I love the way that the bridge kind of builds that last chorus and goes off with a huge bang. It's an awesome alternative rock song. The album cover as well, I believe, is kind of iconic. I love that kind of orangey sky and the Cardinia Bowling Club with the old guys just throwing down a bowl in the front with that little weird spaceship looking thing, which was actually one of those Futuro buildings that was near where they grew up in the suburb of Willetton for a while. Again, they were able to kind of show this authenticity about, sticking to their roots and showing, hey, this is where we grew up. And after the success of their debut album, they had huge festival spots at the Big Day Out, Home Bake, and supports for some massive American bands like Soundgarden, Everclear, and the Presidents of the United States of America. So in 1999, they were able to back up the success of their debut album with their sophomore release called Of Someday Shambles. This album peaked at number 2 on the ARIA charts and went 1 times platinum, and it was produced by Mark Trombino, who was a pretty notable producer in the mid to late 90s, working with acts like Green Day and Jimmy Eat World. Now, this album featured some more mature songwriting with a little bit more in-depth lyricism. Personally, I think this album is great, but it's probably not as good as their debut, and it's probably in the deeper cuts that I enjoy it a little more. I really like the opening track, Did You Really? And also Star Machine is a favorite of mine. In my opinion, the best single they released from this album would have to be Please Leave, but their 2 major singles, Animal and Feet Touch the Ground, did chart in the Hottest 100s of that year and had a lot of success for them. In 2000, they released a split EP with Jimmy Eat World, and they continued touring and going on big festivals, cementing themselves as one of the biggest alternative rock bands in Australia, all while still living in Perth. In 2001, they released their 3rd album, which was self-titled and had the lead single of Fall Down. This album was produced by a guy who was known by the name of Magoo, who'd worked previously with Regurgitator, but it was around this time where things started to decline for the band. You see, this album only reached number 8, a respectable number in the ARIA charts, but there was no gold or platinum statuses. Fall Down did chart in the Hottest 100, but none of the other songs were able to make a splash. There are moments of maturity in this band, which I'm going to get to later, which I think they were able to do well, but all in all, this album really was kind of a failure. This was also the 3rd and final album that they would put out with the label Murmur, who of course, you've got to remember, was controlled by Sony. So I think there was a little bit of tension starting to arise between Jebediah and the label at this stage. Obviously probably coming from both sides, maybe with Sony not really liking the results they were getting, Jebediah not liking the pressure that was being placed on them, and maybe feeling like that the label wasn't doing a good job of promoting the album. And after all this, Kevin Mitchell decided to do a solo project, and he did it under the name of Bob Evans. And this solo project was a little bit more of a softer acoustic thing, which was really cool to see him do. It showed a different side to him that we hadn't seen yet, and I think it showed a direction that he wanted to go, that potentially he was kind of pushing a little bit towards in the last Jebediah album. But with his solo stuff, I think he was able to hone in on that skill a little bit more and get a bit of a better output. He released his debut album, Suburban Kid, in 2003, and then Jebediah were back at it in 2004, now working on their own independent label called Redline. They put out their fourth album, Braxton Hicks, in 2004, and again, I would have to say this album was a bit of a failure. There are some okay moments on this album, like the singles First Time and No Sleep, but to me, the whole album seemed a little formulaic and it felt like the band was going back to the same well. None of the songs on this album charted or hit the hottest 100s. It probably came to the band that it was time to maybe have a break from Jebediah. Kevin was then able to focus on his solo project Bob Evans, and in 2006 he released his second album on his independent label Redline, and his second album was called Suburban Songbook. And with the release of this album came a very successful single called Don't You Think It's Time. Don't you think it's time? This song got a lot of commercial airplay and actually hit number 22 in the ARIA charts, and it kind of showed that this was probably the direction that was best for Kevin to be taking, because he obviously was able to hone in on a special skill that he developed writing these more delicate sounding acoustic pieces, and his lyricism was developing to a point of maturity that I think was past Jebediah. For the next few years, it seemed that the focus for Kevin was on his solo project, and he continued to release music and tour as Bob Evans. And for a long time, it actually felt like we saw the last of Jebediah, and everything may have been put to bed, but this would have given an opportunity for him and the other band members to reflect on the success of Jebediah, and eventually we saw them return with another album in 2011 called Kosciusko. And the first single they released from this album, She's Like a Comet, was a huge return to success for the band. Now, I remember when this song was released, and it took everyone in the Perth music scene by surprise to see Jebediah back, and also to be sounding this good. There was a refreshed vibrancy on the band. They sounded as youthful as ever, but with that little bit more of a mature edge. The band were now working with an Australian independent label called Due Process, and I think Kevin was probably able to apply some of the things he'd been learning as a musician writing music for Bob Evans when he came back together with his band to give that slightly more of a mature feel to their alternative party rock songs that Jebediah was known so well for. She's Like a Comet actually did pretty well on the charts in Australia, and it hit number 70 in the hottest 100, marking a return to form for the band. Personally, I really enjoy this song, and I would have to say it's probably like their third best song, and when I've gone to see them live a couple of times, it is one of the ones that gets the best reaction. In 2011, Triple J conducted a vote and countdown of the top 100 Australian albums of all time, and their debut album, Slightly Odway, came in at number 15 on that list, showing how respected this album is. And in 2017, they did a national tour to mark 20 years of Slightly Odway, where they played the album in full. I went to one of these shows, and it was a great experience. And after these celebrations, there seemed to be a little bit more of a return to Bob Evans material for Kevin, which, is fair enough. He was having quite a lot of success. And after another long layoff, there was another unexpected return in 2024 when the band released their next album, OIKS. This was a solid return for them, and I liked a couple of the songs like Gum Up the Bearings and the Beatles-esque song Rubber Man. Once again, it showed maturity in songwriting, but still with that quintessential Jebediah party rock sound. And I think it's probably safe to say this could well be their last album, and it was a nice little high to go out on with a respectable album. So overall, what can we learn from Jebediah? The first thing that comes to mind is that you don't have to uproot your life to gain success in the music industry. Back in the day, that may have been the case, but for Jebediah, they were trailblazers in doing this, especially for Perth musicians. They were able to cultivate a following in their small niche hometown. They were able to keep authentic to their roots, and their live performances showed that. They always looked like they were having the best time out there performing, and they were connected with their audience. I think we can all learn from this, especially if you're a West Australian musician. Living in one of the most isolated cities in the world, you don't really get a chance to tour other cities and find a deeper audience. So you're better off just cultivating what you've got here in Perth. And learning from their success, we've seen other huge artists come from Western Australia to become some of the biggest in the country and the world. The likes of Eskimo Joe, Tame Impala, Spacey Jane, all followed this model of cultivating a strong but small audience in Perth first, and then making it bigger in Australia. It's important to stay authentic to your true selves and your true roots in your songs and performance, and Jebediah was able to show that. Their lasting legacy is that they will be one of the most important West Australian bands in history, and they go down as a very respectable Australian band overall. They were the windbreaker for success in Perth, and they were able to show that by staying home and becoming professional musicians. Thanks for checking out this video, everyone. Please feel free to like and share this one. Give me some comments about Jebediah. What do you know? What do you like about them? What's your favorite songs? And hey, if you really like this stuff that I talk about Australian music, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks, bye.